The piercing sound of my cell phone ringing at 3:15 in the morning jolted me from deep sleep. I fumbled across the nightstand in the darkness, knocking over a glass of water as my heart pounded with the kind of panic that only comes from late-night emergency calls. Before I could even mumble a groggy hello, my mother's voice exploded through the speaker with razor-sharp urgency that cut through my confusion like a knife through paper. She demanded I get to Phoenix General Hospital immediately because Blake was in complete kidney failure, and the entire family had already decided I would donate one of mine to save his life. When I asked for just a moment to process this life-changing bombshell, she screamed that I was being selfish and cruel for hesitating to rescue my dying brother. The call ended with a harsh click, leaving me staring at the ceiling in stunned silence, finally understanding that my family viewed me not as a person with rights and feelings, but as a collection of spare organs for their precious golden child. I dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness and drove through empty Phoenix streets toward the hospital, my mind racing with questions and disbelief. The fluorescent lighting in the medical center felt harsh against my tired eyes as I navigated unfamiliar hallways to reach the nephrology ward. Blake lay propped up in his hospital bed, looking pale, but maintaining that smug expression I remembered from countless childhood confrontations, where he had manipulated situations to his advantage. "Look who finally showed up to save the day," Blake said with artificial warmth as I entered his room. His tone carried that familiar mixture of entitlement and condescension that had characterized our relationship for as long as I could remember. I knew I could count on my big brother when it really mattered. My parents flanked his bedside like protective guards defending their most precious treasure. Robert, my father, stood ramrod straight in his expensive business suit, despite the early hour his steel-gray eyes fixed on me with cold expectation. Linda, my mother, clutched a designer handbag, while dabbing at her carefully applied makeup with a tissue, her tears seeming more performative than genuine. "The medical team has explained everything to us," my father announced without any preliminary conversation or concern for my well-being. "Blake requires immediate transplant surgery, and you're the obvious choice as his donor. We've already discussed preliminary testing with his physician." The assumption in his voice made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Nobody consulted me about this decision. I need time to understand the risks, discuss it with Sarah, research the recovery process, and consider how this affects my business." Blake's facade cracked instantly, revealing the irritation beneath his grateful act. "Research what exactly I'm dying, and you want to schedule committee meetings about whether my life is worth inconveniencing yourself. This is major surgery with serious complications and a long recovery period. Sarah and I are planning our wedding in 6 months, and I have construction projects that depend on my physical capabilities." I kept my voice level despite feeling increasingly cornered by their collective pressure. My mother stepped closer, her face contorting with disgust. "How can you prioritize a wedding and work contracts over your brother's survival? This is exactly the kind of selfishness that has always characterized your approach to family responsibilities. I'm not refusing, I'm asking for reasonable time to make an informed decision about irreversible surgery that will permanently affect my health and livelihood." A hospital social worker named Janet tried to intervene from her position near the door. "Mr. Thompson has every legal right to consider all aspects of donation without pressure from family members. This decision cannot and should not be rushed or coerced." My family ignored her completely, speaking over her professional guidance as if her expertise meant nothing compared to their emotional demands. My father's voice grew menacing as he leaned forward with obvious threat in his posture. "Let me clarify something important, Otis. I co-signed the loan that allowed you to start Thompson Brothers contracting. That financial obligation can be called in immediately if I determine you're not meeting your family commitments and moral responsibilities." His words felt like a physical attack on everything I had worked to build. My construction company represented years of 18-hour days, weekend sacrifices, and careful relationship building with clients who trusted my craftsmanship and reliability. "You're threatening to destroy my livelihood because I want 24 hours to think about donating an organ," I asked, barely believing what I was hearing from my own father. "We're reminding you what family loyalty actually means in practical terms," my mother replied with icy precision. "If you choose to abandon Blake in his greatest hour of need, then you've chosen to abandon this family permanently. Don't expect continued support, financial assistance, or emotional connection after making that choice." Blake reclined against his pillows, watching this emotional manipulation unfold with obvious satisfaction. "Stop making this complicated, Otis. We both know you'll eventually agree because that's what decent people do for their families. Why torture everyone with this unnecessary drama and delay?" I looked around the sterile hospital room at these three people who shared my DNA but felt like complete strangers in their willingness to destroy me for refusing immediate compliance with their demands. Janet gave me an encouraging nod and silently mouthed, "You have choices," but seemed uncomfortable with the toxic family dynamics she was witnessing. "I need 48 hours to research this procedure, discuss it with Sarah, and consult with my own physician about the risks and recovery timeline," I stated firmly. "That's a reasonable request for such a life-altering decision." My father's expression darkened with barely controlled rage. "You have exactly 24 hours to make the right choice, Otis. After that deadline, we'll assume you've decided to let Blake die, and will respond appropriately to that betrayal." Walking away from that hospital room felt like crossing a bridge that was burning behind me. The automatic glass doors closed with a soft, pneumatic hiss, and I stood alone in the parking lot under the harsh security lighting, feeling more isolated and abandoned than at any point in my 28 years of life. The warm desert air did nothing to ease the cold certainty that my family was willing to destroy everything I had built rather than accept my need to make an informed decision about my own body. Within hours of leaving Phoenix, General Blake had transformed his social media presence into a sophisticated propaganda machine designed to paint me as a heartless villain abandoning his dying brother. His Instagram account, normally filled with luxury lifestyle content, showcasing expensive cars and exclusive restaurants, became a carefully curated gallery of emotional manipulation, targeting our shared community. He posted vintage photographs from our childhood images of us building elaborate sandcastles during family vacations to California beaches, accompanied by captions that read, "My big brother taught me that family bonds are unbreakable. I'm praying he remembers that lesson now when I need him most desperately." The campaign spread through Phoenix like wildfire across dry brush. Blake had cultivated extensive professional networks throughout the real estate development industry, and those connections amplified his message across multiple social media platforms. Each share added another layer to the narrative, portraying me as a selfish monster, prioritizing personal convenience over familial obligation. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications as strangers discovered my personal profiles and unleashed torrents of condemnation. People who had never met me felt compelled to comment on years-old photos, calling me every imaginable name and questioning my fundamental humanity. My business Facebook page became a battleground where anonymous accounts left scathing one-star reviews condemning Thompson brothers, contracting for being owned by someone who would let his own blood die for money. The local television news discovered Blake's story after he personally contacted their human interest department with an exclusive interview opportunity. I watched in horrified fascination from my living room couch as he appeared on the evening broadcast, positioned in his hospital bed, looking fragile and vulnerable while speaking directly to the camera with perfectly calibrated emotion. "I don't understand what changed between us," Blake told the sympathetic reporter, his voice cracking at precisely the right moments. "Growing up, Otis was my protector, my role model, the person I admired most in the world. I thought blood meant something, that family loyalty was sacred, but apparently I was naive. The interviewer, a polished young woman with professionally styled auburn hair, nodded with practiced empathy. "Have you been able to communicate with your brother about his reluctance to help you?" "I've tried reaching out, but he seems more concerned with his construction projects and wedding planning than my medical crisis. I understand those things matter to him, but I'm running out of time rapidly. The doctors say I have days, maybe weeks, before my condition becomes irreversible and fatal." My construction business suffered immediate and devastating consequences. 3 major clients canceled ongoing projects after seeing the news coverage unwilling to be associated with someone portrayed as morally bankrupt by local media. The Henderson family canceled their custom home renovation. The Martinez Business Complex project was terminated, and the downtown commercial development deal that represented my largest contract ever was permanently withdrawn. Sarah bore the brunt of secondary attacks designed to isolate me from my support system. Anonymous callers contacted her workplace, repeatedly questioning her judgment in remaining engaged to someone they described as a sociopathic narcissist. The messages followed identical scripts that suggested coordinated harassment rather than spontaneous community outrage. "Someone called the office 6 times today," Sarah reported that evening, her voice strained with exhaustion. "Different voices each time, but they all said essentially the same thing about you being dangerous and unstable. My supervisor is getting frustrated with the disruption." Blake appeared on 2 additional television programs that week, each performance more emotionally devastating than the previous. He brought childhood photographs, medical documentation, and even recruited distant cousins to testify about his wonderful character and the family's devastation at my supposed abandonment. The psychological warfare reached its peak when I discovered "murderer" spray-painted across my work truck in dripping red letters that looked like blood in the early morning light. My hands trembled as I stared at the vandalism, realizing Blake's media campaign had inspired actual criminal behavior from people who felt righteously justified in punishing me. Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, emerged from her house carrying a bucket of soapy water and steel wool scrubbing pads. She was a retired teacher who had always appreciated the free maintenance work I performed on her property whenever she needed assistance with minor repairs. "This is absolutely disgraceful," she declared, attacking the paint with fierce determination. "I've watched you grow up since you were 16 years old, Otis. You're a good man with integrity, and I don't care what lies they're broadcasting on television." We worked together in comfortable silence, gradually erasing the hateful message, while I contemplated the sophisticated cruelty of Blake's strategy. He wasn't simply pressuring me to donate an organ. He was systematically destroying my reputation, livelihood, and relationships to force compliance through complete social isolation. The realization that my own brother would rather obliterate everything I had built than accept my request for time to make an informed decision revealed a level of narcissistic entitlement I had never fully understood. Blake didn't see me as a person with legitimate concerns and rights. He viewed me as an obstacle to getting what he wanted, an obstacle that needed to be eliminated through any means necessary. By the end of that devastating week, Thompson Brothers Contracting had lost 8 major contracts and dozens of smaller maintenance jobs that provided my steady income. My phone had stopped ringing entirely, except for harassment calls from strangers who felt morally obligated to condemn me based on Blake's carefully crafted media narrative. The isolation was becoming unbearable as former friends and professional associates distanced themselves from the controversy surrounding my family situation. I realized I needed to take decisive action to defend myself before Blake's campaign completely destroyed everything I had spent years building through honest work and reliable service. I decided to drive to Blake's luxury condominium complex in Scottsdale and attempt a private conversation away from our parents' emotional manipulation and the hospital staff, who seemed to worship him as a tragic hero. Perhaps if I could speak with him directly, I could make him understand that his tactics were destroying our family regardless of my ultimate decision about the surgery. The Desert Palms condominiums represented exactly the kind of exclusive lifestyle Blake had cultivated through his real estate success. The complex featured contemporary glass and steel architecture, manicured desert landscaping, and a security gate staffed by uniformed guards who looked like they moonlighted as personal protection specialists. When I provided my name and requested permission to visit Blake Thompson in Unit 1247, the security guard made a brief phone call before shaking his head with professional politeness. "Mr. Thompson says he's experiencing severe fatigue and cannot receive visitors at this time. He asks that you respect his medical condition and need for uninterrupted rest." I sat in my truck outside the complex for 30 minutes, gathering courage and rehearsing what I wanted to say if Blake would grant me just 5 minutes to explain my perspective. The Arizona sun blazed through my windshield, despite the air conditioning running at maximum capacity, making the interior uncomfortably warm. Eventually, I accepted defeat and began the drive home feeling crushed by the knowledge that Blake wouldn't even allow me 5 minutes to attempt reconciliation. As I merged onto the main thoroughfare leading away from his complex, I noticed a police cruiser following at a reasonable distance, but thought nothing of it since law enforcement was common in affluent neighborhoods. The red and blue emergency lights activated when I was approximately 3 miles from Blake's condominium. I immediately pulled into a shopping center parking lot, my heart racing with confusion, since I had been driving exactly the posted speed limit with current registration and valid insurance. The approaching officer appeared young, probably in his mid-20s, with a serious demeanor and reflective sunglasses that concealed his expression. His uniform was crisp, and his movement suggested military or law enforcement training. "License, registration, and proof of insurance, please," he requested without explaining the reason for the traffic stop. "Certainly, officer. Can you tell me why you pulled me over? I was observing all traffic laws, and my vehicle registration is current." "Your left rear tail light is malfunctioning, which constitutes a safety violation requiring immediate correction and vehicle inspection." I was absolutely certain both taillights had been functioning properly that morning when I performed my routine equipment check, but I handed over my documents without argument. The officer returned to his patrol car and remained there for what felt like an eternity while I waited in the oppressive heat. When he returned, a second officer accompanied him, both men adopting formal positions that suggested this was more than a routine equipment violation. "Sir, please step out of your vehicle and keep your hands visible at all times." "What's happening?" I asked, while complying with their instructions, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid any misunderstandings. "We have reasonable suspicion that you may be transporting controlled substances. We're going to conduct a thorough search of your vehicle and personal belongings." My stomach dropped toward the pavement. "Officers, I don't use illegal drugs. I don't transport illegal substances, and I give you complete consent to search anything you want. My truck contains only construction tools and legitimate work materials." They searched systematically and thoroughly, examining every toolbox, storage compartment, seat cushion, and corner of the truck bed, where I kept lumber and equipment. I stood on the hot asphalt, watching them dismantle my carefully organized workspace, feeling helpless and increasingly confused about what they hoped to discover. After approximately 20 minutes of intensive searching, one officer called out from behind my truck. "Located something suspicious." He emerged holding a small, clear plastic bag containing white crystalline powder retrieved from inside my primary toolbox next to my most expensive power tools. The baggie appeared to have been carefully concealed behind my circular saw, but positioned where a thorough search would inevitably find it. "That substance does not belong to me," I said immediately, my voice breaking with genuine shock. "I have never seen that bag before in my life. Someone planted that evidence in my truck." The officers exchanged a knowing look that I recognized from countless television crime dramas. They had heard identical denials from actual drug dealers thousands of times, and my authentic shock sounded exactly like practiced deception to their experienced ears. Sir, you are under arrest for possession of cocaine with intent to distribute. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, and I was placed in the back of the patrol car, I watched my truck being impounded and thought about the perfect timing of this entire incident. Someone had known I was visiting Blake's complex, predicted my route home, and arranged for evidence to be planted exactly where a routine search would discover it. The jail processing felt like a nightmare sequence of fingerprinting mugshots and paperwork that reduced me from a person to a case number in the criminal justice system. I was permitted one phone call, and I used it to contact Sarah, my voice trembling, as I tried to explain what had happened. They discovered drugs in my truck, Sarah. Someone planted cocaine in my toolbox and arranged for police to find it. Her silence stretched for several heartbeats before she responded. I'm contacting a criminal defense attorney immediately and posting your bail. Don't speak to anyone about anything until I arrive with legal representation. Before Sarah could reach the jail, I received an unexpected visitor. Blake walked into the visitation room looking healthier and more energetic than he had appeared in the hospital, his complexion robust and his movements steady and confident. He settled into the chair across from me with that familiar, arrogant smile that meant he had successfully orchestrated something that benefited him at my expense. Unfortunate turn of events, big brother, he said, leaning back with casual satisfaction. Drug possession charges carry serious penalties in Arizona. You could be looking at 5 to 10 years in state prison, especially with the quantity they discovered. You orchestrated this entire setup, I stated quietly, meeting his eyes, and seeing no trace of the desperate dying man from the hospital bed. Blake's smile broadened with obvious pleasure. Orchestrated what I'm critically ill with kidney failure, confined to my hospital bed, and too weak to leave the medical facility. How could I possibly arrange for drugs to appear in your truck? You hired someone to plant that evidence. You planned this whole frame-up. He leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering his voice, so the security cameras couldn't capture his words. Here's what's beautiful about this situation, Otis. Once you're convicted of felony drug charges, you'll be medically ineligible as an organ donor. The hospital will reject you completely. So I get public sympathy for having a brother who refused to save my life, plus additional tragedy points, because that same brother turned out to be a drug dealer who couldn't help, even if he wanted to. I felt like I was staring at a complete stranger wearing my brother's familiar features. Why would you destroy me like this? What did I ever do to deserve such hatred? You embarrassed me publicly by refusing my request. You made me appear like someone who doesn't deserve automatic help from his own family. You forced me to beg and plead instead of simply complying with what I needed. That kind of humiliation is completely unacceptable. He stood up and straightened his expensive designer jacket, preparing to leave. Enjoy county jail, Otis. I understand the food is terrible and the accommodations are uncomfortable, but perhaps that's appropriate for someone who abandoned his dying brother to pursue a career in drug dealing. As Blake walked away without looking back, I finally understood this had never been about kidney donation or medical necessity. This was about power control, and Blake's pathological inability to accept that anyone, even his own brother, might have the right to say no to his demands. I also realized my parents had almost certainly known about this plan, which meant my entire family had conspired to destroy my life, rather than accept my need for time to consider major surgery. Sarah posted my bail using our entire wedding fund, $25,000, that represented 2 years of careful savings for our future together. When she picked me up from the county jail the following morning, her eyes were red from sleepless worry, but her expression showed unwavering determination to fight for my freedom. I hired David Kowalski from the Public Defenders Association, she explained, as we drove through morning traffic toward downtown Phoenix. He specializes in drug cases and says the evidence against you is circumstantial, but Blake has connections throughout the prosecutor's office who are pushing for maximum penalties. David Kowalski maintained a modest office in a converted warehouse building surrounded by legal documents and case files that testified to years of defending people who couldn't afford expensive attorneys. He was a lean man in his early 50s, with intelligent brown eyes and a direct communication style that I found reassuring after days of manipulation and deception. The cocaine they found was pharmaceutical grade worth approximately $5,000 on the street, he explained while spreading police photographs across his cluttered desk. That quantity elevates this from simple possession to possession, with intent to distribute, which carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 3 years in state prison. I examined the evidence photos showing my truck being searched, looking for any clue about how the drugs had been planted without my knowledge. There must be security footage from the condominium complex, or traffic cameras that captured someone tampering with my vehicle. I've submitted requests for all available surveillance footage, but these investigations require time to complete properly, and Blake's associates in the district attorney's office are demanding a rapid trial schedule. They want you convicted before we can mount an effective defense. The stress was creating serious strain in my relationship with Sarah. She supported me publicly and stood by my claims of innocence, but I could detect growing doubt in her private moments when she thought I wasn't watching. The woman I planned to marry was beginning to question whether she truly knew the man she had agreed to spend her life with. Those doubts were systematically exploited by an ongoing harassment campaign targeting Sarah's workplace and personal life. Unknown callers contacted her office multiple times daily, leaving messages that questioned her judgment and suggested she was naive about my secret criminal activities. The calls came from different phone numbers with different voices, but they followed identical scripts that implied coordinated psychological warfare rather than spontaneous community concern. 3 days after my arrest, while reviewing Blake's hospital visitor logs with David, I noticed an entry that seemed significant. My father had visited Blake the day before my arrest, staying for over 2 hours, according to the sign-in and sign-out documentation. "That's interesting timing," David observed when I pointed out the lengthy visit. "What would your father need to discuss with Blake for 2 hours immediately before you were framed for drug possession?" I couldn't stop thinking about that hospital visit. Robert Thompson was a methodical businessman who planned every detail of his professional and personal activities with military precision. A 2-hour hospital conversation suggested serious strategic planning rather than casual family support. Sarah worked for Southwestern Communications as a customer service supervisor, a position that provided her access to telephone billing records and call logs for troubleshooting customer problems. She normally would never abuse that access for personal reasons, but these circumstances were far from normal. "I could lose my job for accessing customer records without authorization," she said, sitting at her laptop in our apartment late that evening. "But if your family is actively conspiring against you, we need documentary evidence to prove it." She accessed the billing records for my parents' home phone and cellular accounts for the week preceding my arrest. The pattern that emerged was deeply incriminating numerous calls between my father's cell phone and a number registered to Marcus Hendricks, a licensed private investigator operating in Phoenix. "Who is Marcus Hendricks?" I asked, writing down the phone number and timestamp information. "Let's find out exactly what kind of services he provides." An internet search revealed that Marcus Hendricks operated a private investigation business, specializing in what his website euphemistically called discrete personal and business problem resolution. His online presence was deliberately vague about specific services, but client testimonials suggested he was willing to operate in legal gray areas that more reputable investigators avoided. The next morning, I called Marcus Hendricks, directly pretending to be a potential client who needed help with a sensitive family situation that required unconventional solutions. "Mr. Hendricks, I received your contact information from Robert Thompson. He mentioned you provided excellent assistance with a problem involving his son, and I have a similar situation requiring professional intervention." There was a brief pause before he responded. Robert Thompson compensated me generously to handle his Otis situation, but that job has been completed successfully. What type of family problem are you dealing with? My heart began racing as I realized Marcus had just confessed to accepting payment from my father to handle me in some way. Actually, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is Otis Thompson, and I'd like to meet with you to discuss what my father hired you to accomplish. The phone line went silent immediately as Marcus realized he had accidentally confessed to criminal conspiracy. The call had provided confirmation that my father had hired a private investigator to take action against me, but it wasn't sufficient evidence for criminal court proceedings. David Kowalski was encouraged by this development, but warned that we needed much stronger evidence to challenge the drug charges in court. That phone conversation proves your suspicions are correct, but we need Marcus to confess his specific actions in a way that can be verified independently. What if I arrange to meet with him in person and try to get him to explain what he did? Absolutely not. If your family is willing to frame you for felony drug possession, they're capable of much more serious violence. We need to gather evidence carefully without putting you in additional danger. That evening, Sarah and I sat in our living room surrounded by photographs from happier times, family gatherings, where everyone smiled genuinely construction projects I had completed with pride vacations we had enjoyed together. Looking at those images, I realized the person I thought I was had been systematically destroyed by people who were supposed to love and protect me. I found additional evidence, Sarah said quietly, reviewing phone records she had printed at work. Your mother made multiple calls to Marcus Hendricks going back 3 weeks. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made after your hospital confrontation. They've been planning to destroy you for almost a month. The betrayal felt deeper than any physical injury I had ever experienced. My parents hadn't simply threatened me during our hospital meeting. They had already been plotting to frame me for serious crimes before that confrontation occurred. The kidney donation crisis had provided convenient cover for a conspiracy they had been developing for weeks. As I lay awake that night, listening to Sarah's troubled breathing beside me, I understood that proving my innocence would require exposing my family's crimes and watching them face serious criminal consequences. They had forced me into a war I never wanted to fight. But winning would mean destroying the people who had raised me, even though they had already chosen to destroy me first. While David focused on the legal aspects of my criminal defense, Sarah had become obsessed with investigating Blake's medical condition, spending hours researching kidney failure symptoms, treatment protocols, and hospital procedures to identify inconsistencies in his narrative. Something doesn't make sense about Blake's timeline, she said, spreading medical research printouts across our kitchen table. Look at his social media activity compared to what someone with end-stage kidney failure should be experiencing physically and mentally. She displayed screenshots of Blake's Instagram posts from the previous month, documenting his activities while supposedly dying of kidney disease. The images showed him attending expensive restaurant dinners, participating in late-night social events, and completing intensive workout sessions at his private fitness club. The man in those photographs looked healthier and more energetic than he had appeared 6 months earlier. People with advanced kidney failure experience severe fatigue, chronic nausea, muscle weakness, and cognitive impairment. Sarah explained, referencing medical literature she had downloaded. Blake's social media shows someone with excellent physical condition and unlimited energy for recreational activities. She had also developed a friendship with Jennifer Walsh, a registered nurse working in the nephrology unit at Phoenix General Hospital. Jennifer was approximately Sarah's age and had witnessed my family's aggressive behavior during hospital visits, making her sympathetic to our situation and suspicious of Blake's case. I cannot provide Blake's confidential medical records without violating federal privacy laws and losing my nursing license, Jennifer had explained during their coffee meeting at a restaurant near the hospital. But I can share my professional observations about irregularities in his case that concern me as a medical professional. Jennifer had noticed that Blake's documented symptoms didn't match his physical appearance and behavior when he thought medical staff weren't observing him. His laboratory results showed severe kidney dysfunction, but his vital signs, energy levels, and general demeanor suggested robust health. Dr. Martinez has been handling Blake's case with unusual secrecy, Jennifer reported. Normally, complex kidney cases involve our entire nephrology team for consultation and treatment planning, but he's been managing Blake's care almost entirely independently. He's also been very specific about which laboratory technicians process Blake's blood and urine samples. Sarah returned from that meeting with a theory that seemed impossible, but explained every inconsistency we had identified in Blake's medical crisis. What if Blake isn't actually sick at all? She proposed, sitting across from me at our small dining table. What if this entire kidney failure emergency is completely fabricated? I stared at her in disbelief, trying to process the implications of such an elaborate deception. That's impossible, Sarah. You can't fake kidney failure convincingly. There are blood tests, urinalysis, imaging studies, and multiple verification procedures. Medical fraud on that scale would require corrupting several healthcare professionals. Unless you have a dishonest doctor willing to falsify results in exchange for substantial financial compensation. She showed me a newspaper article from 18 months earlier documenting insurance fraud investigations in the Phoenix medical community. Several physicians had been convicted of creating false diagnoses to collect fraudulent insurance payouts, and Dr. Martinez's practice had been investigated but cleared of criminal wrongdoing. Maybe Dr. Martinez was cleared because he's more sophisticated at hiding his fraud than the doctors who were caught and prosecuted. The possibility that Blake had been fabricating his kidney failure transformed our understanding of the entire situation. If Sarah's theory was correct, my family hadn't just been willing to destroy my life to force organ donation. They had constructed an elaborate insurance fraud scheme with me positioned as their primary victim. Jennifer agreed to help us investigate discreetly, understanding that exposing medical fraud was her professional obligation, but only if we promised to protect her identity during any criminal proceedings. She began documenting Blake's behavior during hospital stays, noting instances when he appeared completely healthy while believing himself unobserved. Yesterday, I saw him in the emergency stairwell talking on his cell phone for 45 minutes, she reported during our next clandestine meeting. He was walking normally, his complexion looked excellent, and he seemed to have unlimited energy. But 15 minutes later, when I checked on him in his room, he was lying in bed complaining of severe fatigue and requesting additional pain medication. The definitive evidence came when Jennifer risked her career to access Blake's complete medical files through the hospital's internal computer system. What she discovered confirmed our most suspicious theories. Blake's actual kidney function was completely normal and had remained stable throughout his supposed medical emergency. His real laboratory results show perfect kidney health. Jennifer explained during a secret meeting in a parking garage downtown. But there's a second set of results in his file showing critical kidney failure. Someone has been creating fraudulent test results and inserting them into his official medical record. She handed Sarah a manila envelope containing photocopied laboratory reports. The legitimate results showed normal kidney function, while the falsified results displayed values consistent with end-stage renal disease. The fake reports had subtle formatting differences and laboratory identification codes that suggested they had been created outside the hospital's standard testing procedures. Dr. Martinez has been submitting the fraudulent results to your family and insurance companies while concealing the authentic results in a restricted section of Blake's medical file. This represents massive federal fraud, and if Blake knows about it, he's complicit in felony conspiracy charges. I felt physically sick examining the evidence. My brother wasn't just manipulating our family relationships. He was orchestrating a sophisticated insurance fraud operation that could generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in false claims. The life insurance policies, disability benefits, and medical expense reimbursements would create substantial financial rewards, especially if he maintained the deception long enough to collect from multiple sources. There's additional information you need to know. Jennifer continued quietly. I overheard Dr. Martinez discussing Blake's inheritance situation yesterday. Apparently, your grandmother is planning to modify her will to benefit whichever grandson has greater medical expenses and financial needs. Blake could inherit over $1 million if he convinces her he's dying and requires expensive treatment. My grandmother Helen was 89 years old and represented the only source of unconditional love and support in my extended family. She lived in an assisted living facility in Tucson and had been sending heartbroken letters expressing her anguish over our family conflict. The realization that Blake was manipulating her grief to steal my inheritance made me angrier than anything else he had done. We need to report this evidence to federal authorities immediately, I said, but Jennifer shook her head firmly. Not yet. Dr. Martinez has extensive connections throughout the medical and legal communities. If he discovers our investigation before we have comprehensive evidence, he'll destroy everything incriminating and disappear. We need Blake to incriminate himself in a way that cannot be denied or explained away. Driving home that evening, Sarah and I began planning how to expose Blake's fraud without alerting him to our investigation. The irony was overwhelming. Proving my innocence of drug charges required proving my family's guilt in medical fraud, insurance fraud, and elder abuse. The stakes had escalated far beyond my personal freedom. Blake's conspiracy threatened multiple innocent victims, corrupted medical institutions, and exploited an elderly woman's love and trust. Stopping him would require me to become skilled at deception and manipulation, using his own tactics against him for the sake of justice. Armed with comprehensive evidence of Blake's medical fraud conspiracy, I understood that direct confrontation would be meaningless unless I could record him confessing in a legally admissible format. David Kowalski explained that Arizona law permitted recording conversations when one participant consented, making Blake's confession potentially decisive in my criminal defense. If you can get Blake to admit the truth about his fake illness and the drug planting while wearing a recording device, we can use that confession to dismiss your charges and expose the entire conspiracy, David advised. But you must be extremely careful. If Blake realizes you're recording him, he could become violent or dangerous. I spent 3 days planning my approach, studying Blake's psychological patterns and weaknesses. His greatest vulnerability was his narcissistic need to gloat about successful manipulations when he believed he was completely safe from consequences. I would exploit that arrogance by pretending to surrender completely, then arranging a family meeting where he would feel comfortable revealing everything. The recording equipment was surprisingly compact, no larger than a matchbook, and easily concealed inside my shirt pocket. Sarah helped me practice activating the device without obvious hand movements, and we rehearsed conversations designed to encourage my family to reveal specific details about their crimes. Remember, you need them to admit concrete facts about the medical fraud, the drug planting, the insurance schemes, and the inheritance manipulation, Sarah reminded me. Don't guide them too obviously, but create opportunities for them to brag about their cleverness and success. I called my mother and delivered an Academy Award-worthy performance of complete psychological breakdown and defeat. I told her I was terrified of prison, that my attorney said the drug charges were serious, and that I was ready to apologize for being selfish and unreasonable. I should have agreed to donate my kidney immediately when Blake needed help, I said, allowing my voice to crack with convincing emotion. I've destroyed everything by being proud and stubborn, and now I might lose Sarah, my business, my freedom, everything that gives my life meaning and purpose. My mother's voice immediately softened with satisfaction at my apparent surrender. Otis, sweetheart, we never wanted to cause you pain. We just needed you to understand how important family loyalty is in times of crisis. Blake has been so heartbroken by your initial refusal, and now with these terrible legal problems affecting your life. Could we arrange a family meeting tonight? I want to apologize to Blake personally and see if there's any possibility of repairing the damage I've caused to our relationships. She agreed enthusiastically, eager to witness my complete submission to Blake's authority and their family hierarchy. We arranged to meet at my parents' house that evening, supposedly, so I could humble myself and beg forgiveness for prioritizing my own concerns over Blake's medical emergency. The next evening, I sat in my childhood living room surrounded by the people who had fed me, clothed me, taught me moral principles, and then decided to destroy my life when I failed to comply immediately with their demands. The recording device felt impossibly heavy in my shirt pocket. Blake looked healthier and more robust than I had seen him in months, his skin tone vibrant and his movements strong and confident. If I hadn't known about the medical fraud, I would have assumed his treatment was producing miraculous results. "I'm genuinely pleased you came to your senses, Otis," he said, settling into my father's leather recliner like a king receiving tribute from defeated enemies. "This entire situation has been unnecessarily painful for everyone involved. I owe all of you a sincere apology." I began activating the recording device with a subtle gesture. I was selfish and didn't understand what family loyalty really means in practice. I should have agreed to the kidney donation immediately instead of prioritizing my own concerns and fears. My parents exchanged satisfied glances while my father poured expensive scotch, and my mother dabbed at her eyes with tissues, as if my surrender was emotionally overwhelming for her maternal heart. "The important lesson is that you've learned from this difficult experience," my father said approvingly. "Although I'm afraid it may be too late to repair all the consequences of your initial resistance and poor judgment." I looked confused and concerned. "What do you mean it's too late?" Blake smiled with cold satisfaction. "The drug possession charges make you medically unsuitable as an organ donor now, Otis. Hospitals have strict policies against accepting organs from convicted felons, so even if you wanted to help me at this point, it would be impossible. But I haven't been convicted yet. Maybe if I negotiate a plea agreement or receive probation instead of prison time." "Oh, dear brother," my mother said with fake sympathy that barely concealed her pleasure. "You really don't comprehend how serious these charges are. Blake's connections throughout the district attorney's office have made it very clear that you're going to state prison for a minimum of 3 to 5 years. I allowed genuine shock to show on my face. "Blake has connections with the prosecutors handling my case. How is that possible?" Blake leaned forward, unable to resist demonstrating his power and influence over my fate. "I've been cultivating relationships with judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials for years through my real estate development business. When I needed to ensure your drug case would be handled with appropriate severity, I simply made strategic phone calls and explained the family situation." "You mean you influenced the prosecution of my criminal case? But that's tampering with the justice system." "That's intelligent long-term planning and relationship building," my father interrupted proudly. "Blake understood that you would never agree to help voluntarily, so we developed a comprehensive strategy to address the problem efficiently. The recording device was capturing every incriminating word, but I needed them to be more specific about their criminal activities." "What kind of comprehensive strategy?" Blake stood and began pacing around the room, clearly enjoying this opportunity to reveal his brilliance and strategic thinking. "The planning started 3 weeks before your hospital visit. I hired Dr. Martinez to create the medical documentation necessary to justify requesting kidney donation from you. He's been extremely helpful in making my minor kidney stones appear to be life-threatening organ failure." My mother nodded with obvious pride in Blake's creativity. "Blake has always been so intelligent about finding innovative solutions to complicated problems." "So your kidney failure isn't real?" I asked, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. Blake laughed with genuine amusement. "I occasionally pass small kidney stones, nothing that requires medical intervention, certainly nothing requiring transplant surgery. But the fabricated medical reports have been invaluable for insurance claims and will be even more profitable when grandmother revises her will next month." My father joined the conversation enthusiastically, his voice filled with paternal pride. "The medical fraud was Blake's innovation, but hiring Marcus Hendricks to plant the cocaine was my contribution. $25,000 to guarantee you'd be discredited and legally prevented from interfering with Blake's financial plans." You actually paid someone to frame me for drug possession. We paid a professional to solve a family problem efficiently, my mother corrected with precision. Marcus has provided services for your father's business associates previously. He's very discreet and thorough in his work. Blake returned to his chair completely relaxed, now that he believed I was utterly defeated and helpless. The beauty of this strategy is that everyone benefits from the outcome. I collect substantial insurance payouts and inherit grandmother's entire estate. You learn valuable lessons about family loyalty and respect, and our parents maintain their relationship with their successful, appreciative son. Everyone benefits except me, I said quietly. You created this situation through selfishness and stubbornness. Blake replied without any trace of sympathy or remorse. If you had simply agreed to the kidney donation when we first requested it, none of these unpleasant consequences would have been necessary. I felt nauseated listening to him describe destroying my life as if it were a minor inconvenience required to achieve his personal goals. What happens to Sarah? What happens to my construction business? My father shrugged dismissively. Sarah seems intelligent. She'll find someone better once she understands what kind of person you really are underneath your facade. As for your business, I'll probably purchase your client contracts at a significant discount and resell them for profit. We're not trying to be deliberately cruel, my mother added with false compassion. But Blake's success benefits our entire family's financial security, and your stubbornness was threatening that success. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good of everyone involved. Blake glanced at his expensive watch and stood up to leave. This has been emotionally cathartic, but I need to return to the hospital for evening medications and another round of sympathy visits from the nursing staff. Dr. Martinez wants to document my continuing deterioration for the insurance adjusters reviewing my claims. I remained motionless for several seconds, allowing them to savor their complete victory before reaching into my pocket and placing the recording device on the coffee table. The small red indicator light was still blinking, showing that it had captured every word of their detailed confessions. The room fell into absolute silence. Blake stared at the device as if it were a deadly serpent, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, explosive rage. You recorded our private family conversation. My father said, his voice flat and menacing. Just like you framed me for felony drug possession. I replied, standing and moving towards the door. I've uploaded backup copies to secure cloud storage, and my attorney has instructions to release everything if anything suspicious happens to me. Blake lunged toward the recording device, but I was faster and had already secured it. I headed for the exit while my family shouted threats and accusations behind me. This recording doesn't change anything, Blake screamed as I reached my truck. We'll have it suppressed and you'll still go to prison for drug possession. I rolled down my window and looked back at the house where I had learned to walk celebrated birthdays and believed that family meant unconditional love and mutual support. Watch the morning news. I called back to them. The FBI, IRS, and State Medical Board are all very interested in your business activities and want to discuss them with you extensively. As I drove away from my childhood home for what I knew would be the final time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: genuine hope. The war my family had started was finally approaching its end, and justice was about to be served to people who had forgotten that actions have consequences. The coordinated federal raids began at exactly 8:30 the next morning, with FBI agents simultaneously executing search warrants at Blake's real estate office, my parents' residence, and Dr. Martinez's medical practice. I watched the news coverage from David Kowalski's office, experiencing a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness as federal investigators carried boxes of evidence from locations that had been central to my family's life. Special Agent Sarah Chen, the FBI supervisor handling the investigation, had been impressed by the comprehensive scope of the criminal conspiracy revealed in my recording. This case involves federal wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance, fraud, medical fraud, conspiracy to commit multiple felonies, and elder abuse. she explained during our debriefing session. Your brother and parents are facing serious federal charges that carry decades in prison. The Arizona Medical Board suspended Dr. Martinez's license immediately pending the outcome of their investigation. The falsified medical records, fabricated laboratory results, and fraudulent insurance claims represented the most extensive medical fraud operation in state history. Dr. Martinez's cooperation with federal investigators revealed additional victims and criminal associates operating in multiple states. Blake's arrest dominated local news coverage for an entire week. The same journalists who had portrayed him as a tragic victim now competed to expose the shocking details of his elaborate fraud conspiracy. His real estate empire collapsed overnight when investigators froze all his assets and discovered that numerous business deals involved money laundering and systematic tax evasion. The local television station that had provided Blake with sympathetic interview platforms now broadcast a comprehensive exposé titled The Golden Child Deception, featuring interviews with his victims and analysis of how his charm and family connections had enabled years of undetected criminal activity. My drug possession charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never be refiled under any circumstances. The district attorney held a public press conference apologizing for corruption in his office and announcing new oversight protocols to prevent prosecutorial misconduct. 2 assistant prosecutors who had accepted bribes from Blake were indicted on federal corruption charges. The civil lawsuits began immediately following the criminal arrests. Blake's insurance fraud had victimized dozens of companies and individuals who now demanded complete restitution. His luxury condominium, expensive vehicles, and business assets were seized by federal marshals to compensate victims. The criminal restitution requirements alone exceeded $3 million. My parents faced federal conspiracy charges carrying potential sentences of 10 to 15 years in prison. My father's business empire disintegrated when investigators uncovered decades of systematic tax evasion and fraudulent accounting practices. Their house investment accounts and retirement savings were frozen pending criminal proceedings and victim restitution calculations. The most personally satisfying moment came during my visit to Grandmother Helen in Tucson to explain what had really happened during our family crisis. Helen Thompson was 89 years old, but mentally sharp, and she listened to the complete story with growing horror and disappointment. I had already modified my will to leave everything to Blake because I believed he needed financial assistance for medical expenses, she said, tears flowing down her weathered cheeks. Thank goodness you exposed this deception before I made that terrible mistake permanently. She immediately contacted her estate attorney and revised her will again, dividing her assets equally between legitimate medical research charities and establishing educational scholarships for young people pursuing careers in construction and skilled trades. Thompson Brothers. Contracting not only recovered but flourished as our community rallied around the truth of what had happened. Clients who had abandoned me during Blake's smear campaign returned with larger projects and enthusiastic referrals. Local newspapers featured my story as an inspiring example of integrity and perseverance, triumphing over corruption and manipulation. Sarah and I were married 8 months later in a beautiful ceremony at a vineyard in Sedona, surrounded by people who had supported us during the darkest period of our lives. Our guest list included David Kowalski, Jennifer Walsh, Mrs. Rodriguez, and dozens of friends who had never believed Blake's lies about my character. My grandmother served as my best woman, walking down the aisle with dignity and grace that reminded me what authentic family loyalty actually meant. Blake received a federal sentence of 15 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and elder abuse. Dr. Martinez was sentenced to 10 years and permanent revocation of his medical license. My parents each received 8-year sentences and were ordered to pay complete restitution to all victims of their criminal enterprise. During Blake's sentencing hearing, I was permitted to deliver a victim impact statement to the court. I looked at my younger brother sitting at the defendant's table in an orange prison jumpsuit and felt something unexpected, genuine pity for who he had become. Blake taught me that family isn't defined by genetics or legal obligations, I told the packed courtroom. Real family means choosing to love and support people even when it's challenging, even when they disagree with your preferences, even when they can't immediately provide what you want from them. He also taught me that integrity isn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. Integrity means doing what's right even when it costs everything you thought was important. My real family consists of people who chose to stand beside me when I had nothing to offer except honesty and truth. Blake never looked in my direction during the sentencing proceedings. He stared straight ahead as the judge imposed his punishment, displaying no remorse and no acknowledgement of the lives he had destroyed for personal financial gain. 18 months later, I received a letter from Blake in federal prison. It contained 4 pages of self-justification and blame, explaining why everything that had happened was ultimately my fault for refusing to be a better brother and failing to sacrifice myself for his benefit. I read it once and then burned it in our backyard fire pit, watching the smoke carry away the final remnants of my connection to the person I had once called family. Sarah and I expanded Thompson Construction into one of Arizona's most respected building companies. We specialize in affordable housing for working families and maintain a policy of hiring people who deserve second chances, understanding that everyone deserves opportunities to rebuild their lives after making mistakes. We have 2 beautiful children now, Emma and James, growing up in a home filled with honesty, respect, and unconditional love. They know the story of Uncle Blake, and their grandparents presented age-appropriately as lessons about choosing integrity over advantage and authentic love over manipulation. This experience taught me that genuine strength isn't about enduring abuse or meeting unreasonable demands from people who claim to love you. True strength means establishing healthy boundaries, protecting yourself and those you care about, and refusing to participate in systems that require compromising your fundamental values. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean allowing people to continue causing harm. Forgiveness means releasing anger and resentment that can poison your own happiness while maintaining necessary boundaries to protect yourself from future abuse. Most importantly, I discovered that the family you choose is often stronger and more meaningful than the family you inherit through accident of birth. Sarah, our children, our friends, and the community we've built through honest work and genuine relationships represent the kind of love and loyalty that cannot be faked, manipulated, or destroyed by people who view relationships as transactions rather than connections. Blake intended to teach me about family loyalty, but he actually taught me about the difference between love and control, between support and exploitation, between family and ownership. For that education, despite everything it cost, I remain grateful. Have you ever been forced to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself from people who claimed to love you while systematically destroying your life? Sometimes the most difficult decisions we face are also the most crucial for our long-term happiness and personal integrity. What would you do if your own family threatened everything you had built because you wouldn't immediately comply with their demands? I'd love to hear your thoughts about establishing boundaries with toxic family members and how you've handled situations where love was weaponized against you. Thank you for listening to my story and allowing me to share this difficult but important experience. I hope it encourages you to trust your instincts when relationships feel wrong, even when the people pressuring you are supposed to have your best interests at heart. Please like this video. If my story resonated with your own experiences, subscribe for more real-life accounts about overcoming family manipulation and toxic relationship dynamics. Share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of standing up for yourself, and leave a comment sharing your own experiences with difficult family situations, or how you've learned to prioritize your well-being over others' unreasonable expectations. Remember that choosing to protect yourself isn't selfish when the alternative means allowing others to destroy your life for their personal benefit. Take care of yourselves, maintain your boundaries, and I'll see you in the next story.